So 2 years ago, I came across a most wonderful artwork by a fellow deviant on DeviantArt. It was a landscape painting depicting a place called Duinvort Castle, which is a place that exists inside her own created fantasy world, and is a part of her story, a state of equilibrium. And I was immediately blown away. I hungrily devoured the quite considerable author's notes, where she described aspects of the castle and the surrounding environment, and then I left a fairly long comment where I detailed mine own appreciation. And this is where things took quite the turn, I asked her if she had any more reference material on the castle, though at the time I did not explain exactly why I was asking. As things turned out, she did, and graciously permitted me to look at some basic schematics she had made outlining the various building outlines, as well as the ground topology. And I decided to do something very cheeky. I messaged her and said, expect a Christmas present. And at the time, I really did believe that it would only take me about 2-ish months to finish the gift I had in mind. And perhaps it would actually, no, it would not have. And perhaps it could have, if various health and life factors in my life had it turned out differently. Alas, I really should have known better, for the task I was about to undertake was no doubt Herculean, and also, sadly, doomed to failure. Now, I know what you're thinking. Druid Peter, didn't you just upload a status update back in November of 2020, saying that the gift was done? Well, yeah, I did. And that's just like me for people who know. I jump the gun a lot. You see, when I actually uploaded that status, I was expecting to have the entire winter break and most of the rest of the semester uh, for my university courses to focus almost exclusively on this gift. This was due to the fact that I was not expecting the mathematics to get as complex as they did, and unfortunately, they really got complex very fast. Uh, I continue to be amazed at how advanced mathematics truly can be. But even if I hadn't had the absolute deluge of mathematics that was the end of the semester, I still would have had the entire winter break, or so I thought. As it turns out, I caught coronavirus on around December 19th, and I definitely was not expecting that. Ugh. The coronavirus really was the straw that broke the camel's back. After a massive dump of shit that 2020 brought, I am officially saying fuck it. I'm going to show what I do have regarding Queen of Eagle's gift, and then I'm going to be calling it quits, at least for the time being. I may or may not return back to this particular set of. I probably shouldn't say until I reveal, but I think that 2 years of work, interruptions, without pay, especially for this particular project and what it entails, it really is the camel's back. Now, having said that, well, as things stand, it's just massively too much work invested into it. And for a gift, if I had known just how much work this project was going to be from the beginning, I would never have even considered doing it. Now I understand why game developers won't just work for someone who has a game idea. This is truly, an epic undertaking for a solo dev. Although perhaps not an experienced one. Mostly for a first beginner's project, I would say I learned a great deal. But yeah, maybe not try and learn this way, I suppose. And yes, that's right, you heard me. Game developer. I decided to take Queen of Eagle's reference materials, as well as scour her galleries for additional information that would help me flesh out the environment of Duinvort Castle. And then I was going to make a small video game where you could control one of my own OCs, Sara Vilatskova, and walk around the castle. And, oh boy, let me tell you, I had no fucking idea what I was getting myself into. This is especially so because I had no prior experience with Blender, or at the very least very little experience. So not only was this my first ever Blender project, but it was also insanely ambitious. What could go wrong, am I right? Boy. So, how did I do? Well, take a look for yourself. The first step in bringing your Duinvort castle to life, Queen of Eagles, was using the reference images you sent me to recreate the actual terrain in a way that was faithful to your world as described elsewhere. In your author's notes for the artwork, you mentioned that this was a place where the sand dunes were 60 meters high, and since the reference image appeared to show a single hill/dune, I decided to go with a total height of 60 meters above sea level as the highest contour line on the image. Now then, since you had 5 contour lines, and in topographical maps each contour represents an equal vertical distance from the next one over, 60 divided by 5 would imply that each contour line would probably be about 12 meters in height above the previous lower one. Perfect. Next up was the placement of the ocean, or more precisely, the beach, making it compatible with both your reference image, but also with the artwork that you made on DeviantArt. And here is where things got a bit iffy. You see, looking at the artwork, it turns out that there are two possible perspectives of the castle in the reference image that match the perspective shown of the castle in your artwork. The first perspective is as shown like this, and is the original perspective that I chose to place the beach and determine the angle of the ocean waves with respect to the castle. This would actually put the seaward direction in the reference image to be on the left side of the reference image, as opposed to the right, as you specified in your notes. Having said that, this perspective matches the artwork much better than the current one along the horizontal dimensions, but not along the vertical dimensions. And that's actually a huge issue. You see, what I should have done was I should have determined the visual distance of the castle to the viewer in the artwork you created before I determined the height of the castle towers, and correspondingly the height of each floor of each building. This would have allowed me to create the towers at a height that matched much more closely the vertical appearance of the towers in your painted artwork. But unfortunately, I used the painting for a reference much more closely for the horizontal dimensions of the castle. But I used basic construction rules from the International Builders Code for giving floor height dimensions. And as a result, it was impossible for me to find an angle of the castle that matched your artwork in both the horizontal and the vertical dimensions. Whoops. By the way, the worst part about this is that the castle you are seeing right now is not the castle I started working on those 2 years ago. I actually had a completely different Blender file that I worked on for over a year before giving up and realizing I had to start all over. That's right, I actually made so many mistakes originally that after a year of development, I actually had to nuke the project and start from scratch. Well, like I said, I did learn quite a bit. But I still made a metric shit ton of mistakes with the second version of the project. The mismatch between the horizontal and vertical dimensions is simply one of those. And unfortunately, fixing the heights of all the towers and buildings would have meant, well, it ultimately would have meant nuking the entire project a second time and starting afresh for a third. Damn. Well, they do say that third time's a charm, but I wasn't going to do that. So I cheated. I only changed the height of one tower in the complete opposite direction, and then I moved the sea and position of the beach almost a complete 180 degrees to this position. I like this position a lot less than the original, as it doesn't quite match the horizontal dimensions of the perspective of the castle in your artwork, as well as the other perspective. But doing this made it so that it still kind of matched the dimensions of the castle in both the horizontal and the vertical dimensions. And so that was that. There were other huge issues that impeded progress as well, though this is mostly day-to-day stuff. When one is just starting out learning to use Blender, you see, and similar tools and programs, one often doesn't give much thought to optimization. After all, I was just learning how to use Blender, so why worry about doing things perfectly and cleanly when at the time I didn't even know how to do them at all? Of course, it is impossible to have any other mentality when approaching this. After all, even if I did want to focus on optimization at the very beginning, the cognitive overload is simply inevitably too much for any beginner to handle. But this led to problems concerning the massive scope of the project. Namely, I was building something that ultimately wasn't just going to stay in Blender, but was eventually going to be placed in the Godot game engine environment as assets. And these assets needed to be lightweight enough that the computer could run it as a video game. Granted, my computer hardware is already pretty powerful, but then the game still would have had to have been able to run on your machine. And there was no guarantee what kind of computer hardware you had, nor what it was capable of running. Sorry, there was a typo in my script. Still, my reasoning was that if you had anything reasonably modern, then I probably had a lot of leeway before things got difficult. I mean, modern computer hardware is still pretty powerful no matter what, right? Well, as it turns out, my first big mistake was that I tried to model everything using vertices. That's these little pinpoint things on the screen right here. It would seem that professional video game assets are actually at a lower resolution than I originally had believed, and that there are a lot of techniques and tricks to making things look high quality and high resolution while keeping vertices down. This is because, even with just static geometry, the most powerful graphics card is still only going to be able to handle about 1,000,000 vertices in a scene. And since I wasn't worried about doing things efficiently at the very beginning, I quickly ran into that upper limit very quickly, way before I thought I would. This was especially painful since not only did I run into this limit once, but twice. The first version of the project had only the basic terrain and 3 buildings in it, and it was already almost 3,000,000 vertices. The version you see before you was actually closing in on around 900,000 vertices, though I was able to reduce the number to about 400,000. Alas, even at that level, I still had a lot more modeling to do. Getting the combined total assets to be under 1,000,000 when everything was said and done, well, I believe it's doable, but the amount of work involved at this point, sadly, has passed a kind of critical threshold. Just another nail in the coffin of this ambitious yet ultimately doomed project. Though I may redo it someday. There were other issues that would have made things a huge pain in the ass moving forward. Probably the biggest one is that these buildings are supposed to utilize Gothic architecture, which is all very lofty and grandiose and lovely, but looking at reference images online, I think my heart sank to the pit of my stomach straight away. There is simply no way to get that level of detail with just vertices, which means that I was going to have to implement everything in textures, except that I was going to have to design them myself, which would have added another huge asset workload on my lap. And there were other things as well, but you get the idea. Finally, let's take a quick look at another key asset that was supposed to be a part of this project, the character model for Sarah Vilatskova. So originally, I was following along with another YouTube tutorial for modeling anime-style characters, and I will eventually continue and follow up that tutorial. If anyone is interested, I definitely recommend Daniel Kreuter's, I hope I pronounced his name right, video tutorial series, which can be found in the description below. This is how far I got in those tutorials. Not bad. But with everything that had happened over the past 2 years, what with medical issues and schooling issues and time management crisis, yeah, I had to find the absolutely most efficient use of my time. And so I stumbled upon some free-to-use Vroid assets which had no restrictions on modifications of use either. Perfect. This right here is the original Vroid asset I was able to acquire. And this is how far I got with creating the player character, Sarah Vilatskova. Now, sadly, architectural and environment modeling in Blender has a lot of aspects that are completely different from character modeling. These two files I slaved over for 2 years, trying to learn everything at once for a first project. And holy shit was it difficult. I remember absolutely screaming at the machine because I couldn't figure out some truly basic things like viewport navigation. And yes, even this character model is going to have to be scrapped and remade, though I am pretty proud of how far I was able to get. I won't go into too much detail about what's wrong with the character asset. Suffice to say, there were some mistakes made that will take so much time and effort to fix that it's actually easier to start from scratch, as sad as that is. But despite that, knowing what I now know about Blender, I'm actually looking forward to starting over. Queen of Eagles. This was, and still is, my gift to you. It was monumentally ambitious in scope, such that it could only have been undertaken by someone who is supremely confident in their abilities, or someone who is completely naive regarding what it would actually take, like me. Now, I know better, and so I can confidently say that you will forever claim the title of most lavish gift ever from Druid Peter, because I'm never doing this again as a pure gift for anyone else. I swear. Though having said that, I do recall that there were other motives besides being a pure gift for me embarking on this project as well. Things have changed regarding that, but still, please expect a note about that over on DeviantArt. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy belated birthday, and congratulations on getting your PhD. Signing off, Druid Peter.